It's been a long 6 years since the last main installment in the Halo series. Unfortunately, 343 Industries hasn't had the best luck with Halo since picking up the series from Bungie in the early 2010s. The rocky launch of the Halo Master Chief Collection, a lackluster multiplayer in Halo 4, and an abysmal story in Halo 5 ultimately left a lot of weight on the developers' shoulders to succeed with their newest entry, Halo Infinite. True to its name, Halo Infinite does feel like an expansive take on the series with some of the best feeling movement and gunplay I've had the pleasure of experiencing in Halo. Unfortunately, in other ways, the name doesn't capture its ambitions and the ways it feels stuck in the past, partially to its engine still being largely the dated BLAM engine and being held back by the base Xbox Model 1 support. Nevertheless, Halo Infinite is no doubt the best Halo game from 343 to date, but that's not exactly a high bar to reach either. While it technically follows through and continues off where Halo 5 left off, for all intents and purposes, Halo Infinite feels more like a soft reboot for Halo 5's events rather than a conclusion to the trilogy started with Halo 4. You get left with more questions and answers, and the villains set up in this entry don't really feel all that meaningful, coming and going in the blink of an eye. What does work with this entry is a new unexpected trio of friends consisting of the new human character simply known as the Pilot, who finds Master Chief floating in space. Then there's Master Chief himself, and the new AI character reminiscent of Cortana who goes by the name The Weapon. The unlikely group of friends butt heads as they work together to put a stop to the Banish's efforts to take over Zeta Halo. Each of them brings out the best in one another and leads to some much needed and welcome humanization for the franchise. The Pilot has been lost in space and now finds himself in the middle of a war wanting to simply go home. Master Chief, on the other hand, feels guilty for what's happened, especially with the recent actions of Cortana, who, not long ago, was the closest thing he had to a family, only now a distant memory. The Weapon, on the other hand, feels like a surrogate daughter to Chief in many ways, and despite being nothing but helpful, struggles to get him to trust her. The Master Chief easily steals the show with some of the best characterization he's had in the series' entirety. You can hear the regret in his voice, and the jaded distrust that he's shrouded himself in is constantly on display. Just opposing all that is his empathy for the Pilot and the rest of humanity who suffered at the cost of his choices that is now constantly in his face as he tries to right his wrongs. John hasn't always been a man of too many words, and that hasn't changed here. What is vastly changed is the body language and the little idiosyncrasies to his line delivery that make him the most relatable he's ever felt. Ultimately, Infinite's story doesn't feel like it pushes the narrative forward significantly, nor does it wrap up the prior events all that well. It does do a great job as a character study into the beloved Spartan, but unfortunately feels like it treads familiar ground all too often with its plot as a whole. Halo Infinite's initial pitch was an open-world take on Halo that would feel like a return to form for the expansive sandboxes established in the original Combat Evolved. While Halo Infinite does truly feel expansive and nostalgic even, it by no means ever makes you feel inclined to explore it. Shockingly, despite having this large playground, the world feels sparse and empty. That's juxtaposed with the beautiful vistas that make me wish there was something worth going after. Instead, most of the optional objectives come down to fobs that you can capture and later activate as fast travel points and places to call vehicles. Instead, I found myself going from objective to objective all across Zeta Halo in a very linear fashion, as opposed to the whole expansive free-to-explore marketing that the game was advertised with. What I will commend 343 on is the absolutely stellar feeling movement and gunplay that are some of my favorite in the series. Most of these accolades are thanks to the grapple hook equipment that's completely changed the feel and flow of movement. Suddenly I'm able to grapple towards enemies, get out of a firefight, grab a weapon from afar, or just hijack a vehicle. Like throwing a Leviathan in God of War, it's hard to think of any future Halo games without the grapple hook, as it feels that integral to modern day Halo now. Most of the new weapons feel fantastic, like the skewer that makes for some incredibly satisfying destruction. Likewise, the ability to pick up or grapple fusion coils has become a modern day staple in my combat approach, helping to clear the enemy fortresses with ease. Unfortunately, that also applies to the bosses that feel like they were supposed to be these grand fights, but ultimately felt more like a boss rush mode squished down to a boss fight. While playing on normal at least, it didn't feel all that challenging, and that's on the game mode that 343 is saying is the new heroic mode or the new normal mode. Overall, Halo Infinite's campaign was fun and felt great to play, but it didn't feel as ambitious or as extravagant as it was advertised to be. The movement and the gunplay were fantastic, and a lot of the writing for the characters hit close to home. But the open world felt linear, bosses were forgettable, and I never felt inclined to explore outside of unlocking some equipment upgrades through collectible Spartan cores and the occasional audio log. The other half of the gameplay equation is the free-to-play multiplayer, which I normally just not review and say go play it and find out if you like it for yourself, but since it feels so integral to this paid package, I'll be covering it here. Now, at the time of writing this review, it's December 15th, and 343 has had enough time to balance out some gameplay and make some changes based on feedback. Likewise, I've had plenty of time to play the multiplayer both pre and post campaign launch to experience the ever-evolving multiplayer. Modern Halo feels so darn good. The upgrades to movement and gunplay are integral here, and it just works. The classic arena shooter gameplay is as addicting as ever. It feels modern yet familiar without feeling dated either. Playing together on a large team over a Discord call has easily been some of my favorite gaming moments of this year, playing Team Slayer and Stockpile. However, it isn't without its flaws. The biggest early onset issues have been the lack of individual game mode playlists and the progression system. To put it bluntly, the progression system launched completely broken, with some of the greediest progression in a free-to-play multiplayer game. Slow battle pass progression, no ability to unlock currency for free, and a challenge system that feels imbalanced all weigh down on Halo Infinite's progression. Luckily, 343 does seem adamant about making things right with consistent changes and tweaks like a new daily play session bonus that basically guarantees you a level up once a day by just playing 6 matches. While that doesn't completely fix the progression system, it does help alleviate the burden, and it seems like 343 is committed to tweaking things out until it finds a balance. The lack of individual game mode playlists was recently fixed literally this week, with new playlists for Slayer and other fan favorite modes broken up into individual categories. Previously, a quick play and big team mode dominated your choices, leaving you to roll the dice on playing what you wanted to play or ending up on another capture the flag match. Speaking of which, maps and game modes. For the most part, the map design and the game modes have been fun. The new map Bazaar is easily a new favorite of mine, feeling big enough for various game modes but still providing a vertical level design with plenty of close quarter combat scenes and shields to fight in. Unfortunately, some maps are paired with certain game modes that just feel frustrating. Launch site, for example, is so large and one-sided that playing any game of Capture the Flag on it always ends in a tie or just people quitting. While the overall multiplayer is better than when it launched, if it continues to be a service game over the next few years, it's going to need some more updates and rebalancing. Luckily, it seems like 343 is committed to making those changes. It's more now, how long are you willing to put up with its underminings until it gets perfected? Let's get this out of the way first. Halo Infinite is beautiful. The day and night cycle across Zeta Halo makes for some beautiful looking scenery as you ride your mongoose into the sunset. It's marvelous and easily one of the better looking games on Xbox One, that is. You see, for as much as I love the cinematic work, the new lighting system in place, and the vast environments, Halo Infinite also feels stuck in the past visually. A lot of that is attributed to the game starting off as an Xbox One title, and its new engine still largely based on the original Bungie engine. As for the platform, the lowest common denominator means that things had to be scaled back in order to run on the original Xbox One, and while you can improve resolution, shadows, and assets on more powerful platforms, it can only go as far while holding back some of the more intensive design choices. I reviewed the game on Xbox Series X and PC. Xbox Series X sees both a performance and quality mode where it prioritizes a 4K resolution at 60 FPS for quality, occasionally going down to 1800p to maintain that frame rate. Performance mode, on the other hand, targets 120 frames per second, usually hovering around 90 to 115, with a dynamic resolution hovering around 1440p. That dynamic resolution does make for a much softer image and generally more simplified geometry, which is why I went with the 4K 60 mode instead. On PC, despite having better hardware, the game isn't entirely optimized, well, at least not as well as console, which should be expected. Shadow mapping still pops in at close distances, and terrain quality is alright, but nothing to write home about. There is absolutely something astonishing about seeing an open world Halo game, but once that initial excitement wears off, Halo Infinite doesn't feel that much of a leap ahead visually than other titles. In fact, I'd argue that other recent remakes have had better looking cutscenes. Nevertheless, the game is beautiful, but not a technical showcase by any means. Halo Infinite features some beautiful arrangements that may not be my favorite in the series so far, but aren't anything to downplay either. They fail in the silence and moments that don't feature any voice acting, and most incidentally, the scenes where Master Chief's silence speaks mountains on its own. The real stars in the audio department are the voice actors that completely sealed the show for me when it came to the story. John 117 is a man of few words, but when he speaks, it's impactful, may it be an unexpected one-liner, his glimpses of empathy, or just a funny conversation between him and the weapon. Steve Downes is no doubt a master of his craft. The weapon, played by Jen Taylor, who also plays Cortana and Halsey, steals the show as all three, somehow finding their own little idiosyncrasies that make each other feel distinct, yet similar. Lastly, there's Echo 216, otherwise known as the pilot, who plays as our perspective into the events. He's the most human character in all of this, literally, and his point of view makes for some notable moments. Halo Infinite isn't the best Halo game to date, but it is without the best 343 one, and a great modernization of the franchise's core gameplay. While it didn't nail everything it set out to do, or at least advertise it was trying to do, it did accomplish updating a lot of the core game elements, evolving the writing of specific characters, while also acting as a soft reboot for where the story is headed. Sadly, for as much as I loved a lot of this game, it's hard to overlook its flaws in its open world design, multiplayer balancing, and story writing. With that said, 343 has created a great foundation for what is no doubt another trilogy of games to come, and if Infinite is the lowest bar it'll be, I'm more than excited to see where 343 is going to take us.